that someone had sent a letter to Paul with the questions. That I shouldn't have said it like that. That is supposition. We don't know that. It just seems that way. There are indications to that. And so, at any rate, he answers a bunch of questions as we get through the book. But right now, in chapter 6, apparently another one of the problems that he's heard about are that there are Christians that are going to law against other Christians in the church. And so we'll begin in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 1. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 is kind of divided into two portions. And in the first portion, he's dealing with lawsuits against believers. And then the second portion of the chapter, he does a re-attack on sexual immorality in the church. And so let's all read verse 1 together. If you have your Bible, read along with me. Dare any of you, having a matter against another, go to law before the unjust and not before the saints? So Paul is beginning with a phrase that you might have heard nowadays a lot, maybe spoken a little differently. Today we say, how dare you? This is what he's saying. He's saying, how dare you? How dare anyone bring a matter to the courts against a believer? Now, before we get into this, I want to ask some questions, okay? Is it wrong to go to law with a believer that is outside of your church? That's wrong? Yes. Depends on what they did. Let's say they sold you a lemon. Okay? A car that was bad. All right, I'm sorry. I'm dating myself. All right? You bought a car from some guy in Billy Bob's Baptist Church down the road, and it was just a piece of junk. And he lied to you. He lied to you about how good or how bad the car was. You bought the car. Is it wrong to go to law against a Christian outside your church? Oh, great. I love it when we get opposite answers. I'm going to go back with the real spiritual guy back here, the one that's dressed like one of the men in Acts chapter 1 that stood nearby, the one in all white. All right, so can you repeat that? You would just forgive them. That is the highest standard, isn't it? Yes. All right. So what if they're an unbeliever?
I would share the gospel with them.
And then forgive them.
And then, I would pray that he follows the Lord's way, and I would pray for his salvation.
All right, let's make this even more complicated because we heard this morning about one of our Haven alumni, Chris Luithi, who the company that he was associated with used his name to procure a loan, which if you have read or followed along in the Echo Prayer app, it's $1.7 million. And if they can't pay it, he has to pay $1.7 million. And the only way he can legally clear his name is to go to law. Now, what if that business is run by a Christian? What if that business is a Christian business? I don't know anything about it. I didn't look it up. But let's say it is. Chris said that he is not going to go to court until he absolutely has to. Until somebody says, yea, verily, you must pay, then he will take legal action. He wants to give them enough time to try to get things right. Okay? Which I think is very noble of him. Okay? And that's what he's going to do. But let's say that his mind is that he just wants to be clear of this altogether. Would it be wrong? $1.7 million, that will destroy him and his family for the rest of his life. Okay? So, before we answer so quickly to say, yay, this is wrong, and yay, this is right, we need to consider some things. The first thing we need to consider is that 1 Corinthians is a local church epistle. So we can definitely say that within the church, it would be wrong. We'll talk about how it should be handled in a little bit. Outside of the church, then there are some variables we need to consider, and one of those is, like in Chris's situation, what's going to be the impact upon him? He doesn't have that kind of money. I know who he is. I know the guy. He doesn't have that kind of money. He was an officer and he flew F-16s, but even they don't make that much when they retire, okay? So, yeah, 1.7 million. I'm sure he doesn't have that in his bank account. So we need to be able to consider some variables before we say, no, we can't do that, or yes, we can, okay? So the believer, and I like what Sandy had to say, we are on a higher plane than the world, all right? We need to keep that in mind. And judicial matters must therefore be settled, and I'm just going to keep it within the local church, okay? They must be settled in the court of God's people, all right? And we'll see more about how that should be handled. So we should never take our grievances with another believer to the unbelievers, because why? Well, it's a bad testimony on the church. It's a bad testimony on believers. And you know, unbelievers that say, yeah, look at you Christians. You can't even get along one with another. And Jesus said that they'll know us by our love for one another, but look at you people, right? So we need to be very, very wise in matters like this. And I've been around long enough to see situations within local churches where one person could very easily have gone to law with another person about something, okay? So it happens. Look at verse 2. Let's read verse 2 together. Do ye not know that the saints shall judge the world? And if the world shall be judged by you, and ye unworthy to judge the smallest matters. So get the order. We're going to judge the world, but the world should not judge us. All right? That's his point. When do we get to judge the world? At the end. The end of what? The end of time. What period are we looking at when we talk about this? The millennium, right. So you can go to Revelation if you want, Revelation chapter 5 or Revelation chapter 20, and read more about that. But in some way, we're going to rule and reign with Christ. And what all that means, the Bible doesn't say specifically. We get some hints, as to how that's all going to come about, but nothing in concrete. But the point is, if we're going to reign and rule with Christ, should we not be able to judge in simple earthly matters? Like I bought a car from, Isaac, and it turned out to be a junker, but he didn't tell me that it was a junker. He said, it's really a nice car, but you need to know I'm selling it to you as is. Okay, and I buy it, and I take the keys, and I go jump in the thing, and it won't even start. Or I get it out of the parking lot, and the muffler falls off. And it's very clear that he had done some patchwork on that thing just 2 days before, right? And then what do? You go back and you say, hey, you sold me a junker. No, man, I sold it to you as is. Well, every used purchase is usually as is, right? But you know good and well that you got ripped off. You know he did you wrong. He knows he did you wrong. So what do? Well, God has given us some guidelines on how to handle something like this, okay? 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 3. Let's read that. Know ye not that we shall judge angels? How much more things that pertain to this life? We'll talk about the angels in just a minute. But here's the point. Paul says, look, you're going to rule and reign with Christ. You're going to judge angels. And you can't, if you're going to do that on the spiritual plane, which is way up here, why can't you settle earthly matters that are down here? So he's trying to put it all in perspective. But he does say, know ye not that ye shall judge angels? Does everybody here know that you're... Raise your hand if you didn't know you were going to judge angels. You didn't know? Yeah, you're going to judge angels. You want to know more? Can't give it to you because the Bible doesn't say much. Okay? Paul says the Christians will judge angels. We're not exactly sure what this means, but the angels facing judgment would have to be what kind of angels? Fallen angels. So... yeah, we're not going to be judging holy angels. I mean, they're holy. How would that go? You're good. You're good. You're good. So there's got to be something there, right? So it seems that, Satan's hordes of demons will be judged by the redeemed. Some of those demons are already, by the way, according to the scriptures, imprisoned in darkness, awaiting judgment, according to Jude chapter 1, verse 6. Who wants to read that? Jude 1, 6. Okay. Yes. If you go to chapter 2, give me your Bible. I'll get you a new one. All right. Jude chapter 1, verse 6. I could say Jude 6, but somebody that doesn't know any better would be going, man, my Bible's faulty. I need.
Jude 6. And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness, unto the judgment of the great day.
So there's been a constant conflict between holy angels who minister for God's people and Satan and his unholy angels, the demonic spirits, ever since the fall of the angels. And God has, however, manifested his power by, as we saw this morning in several passages, defeating Satan. There are a number of passages which speak of Satan's final judgment. Ezekiel 28, verses 18 and 19. Anybody want to read that? Looking for volunteers? Okay, there we go. Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 18 and 19. And then
therefore will I bring forth a fire in the midst of thee, it shall devour thee, and I will bring thee to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all them that behold thee. All they that know thee among the people shall be astonished at thee. Thou shalt be a terror, and never shalt thou be anymore.
One of the most well-known passages on the fall of Satan is where? Does anybody know? Isaiah chapter 14. Just remember this, Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28. Those are the two main passages in the Old Testament on Satan, okay? So in Isaiah 14, I think it starts around verse 12. You go verses 12 through 14, and you have the fall of Satan. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground? And you go through the list of Satan's I wills. And then verse 15, the very next verse, says something that's really kind of interesting to me. It's always piqued my interest. Who wants to read that? Okay, go for it. All right, the context of that, verses 12 through 14, is speaking of Satan. So verse 15, we would assume, is speaking of Satan. How are we going to see this judgment? I don't know. The Bible gives us these indications that this will happen, but it doesn't exactly tell us how it will happen. It would be like me saying, Kaylee is going to drive a car, but I'm not going to give you the details. I didn't tell you the details of what car or when or how well, right? So we don't get a lot of details. We just know that it's going to be that way. How about Revelation chapter 20 and verse 10? Go. Revelation chapter 20, verse 10. So the beast and false prophet got thrown in 1,000 years earlier. Then we had the millennial kingdom, and now the devil is thrown in, and the beast and false prophet are still there. And now he is there with them. He is judged in that way. And then Romans chapter 16, verse 20. Anyone? There's too many hands. I can't handle it all at once. It's like that. Okay, go ahead.
And the God of peace shall bruise Satan under your feet shortly. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you.
Now this is very interesting because the God of peace shall bruise Satan under your feet. And he's writing to the believers in Rome, right? So how does that all happen? Again, not a lot of detail. We're just told that it's going to happen in some way. So for now, for God's own purposes, Satan has been allowed to continue. But the Scripture speaks of 3 sure events that are recorded for us regarding the activity of Satan and his demonic forces. We know that the devil will be bound during the millennial kingdom in the bottomless pit. That's interesting, a pit with no bottom. I looked it up in Greek to see what it said, and you know what it said? Yeah, the word means a pit with no bottom. So that's not a lot of help. Whatever that means, that's where he's going. And then he's released for a little season. That much is sure. We learn that from the end of the book of Revelation. And then he's finally condemned to the lake of fire. So these things are going to happen. And that is sure. All opposing powers against the Lord will be dealt with in judgment. The scriptures indicate that after the millennium, in some manner, Satan will be judged and we will see it in some way. All right? Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 4. Let's read that. Here we go. If then ye have judgments of things pertaining to this life, set them to judge who are least esteemed in the church. This is a verse that tells us what to do. So again, who sold me the lemon car? I forgot who I picked on. Isaac did. Yeah, it figures. Yeah, good old Isaac. He sold me the lemon car. And what are we supposed to do then, according to this verse? All right, so we take it to the church, set them to judge who are least esteemed in the church. So the church will decide in this matter, okay? Now, how do we do this? I just got sold a lemon car. The muffler fell off right after I drove it out of the driveway, and Isaac stood in the lawn pointing and laughing. What do I do now? Yeah, we take it to the church, but in what manner do we do that? In front of everyone. Yeah, we get up there and say, hey, everybody, right in the middle of the preaching. Hey, everyone, Isaac told me. No, that's not how it happens. How do we do this? There is a right way. The Bible gives us guidance. We've talked about this. Yes. We'll get to that. That's a major point. Yes. One-on-one. So first I go to Isaac and I say, yo, you sold me a lemon. And he says, so? So now I need to take with me, I need to get some witnesses. So I get a couple of witnesses. We go to Isaac and I say, all right, listen up, guys. Hey, you sold me a lemon. And they say, is that right? And he goes, yeah, so? Now we take it before the whole congregation. And according to this verse, it says to let the least esteemed in the church judge in this matter. Now, this is kind of a difficult, I don't want to say difficult concept. It's easy to understand, but it's just hard to understand how that comes into play or what exactly that means, okay? At the time that Paul wrote this, there was a certain construction in the Sanhedrin. You remember Paul was a member of the Sanhedrin, and so he had a lot of working knowledge on the Sanhedrin. But the Sanhedrin was broken up. There was an order within the Sanhedrin. There was the Great Sanhedrin, the whole Sanhedrin, which was 71 members, and they presided in Jerusalem. And then you had the Little Sanhedrin, which was 25, and those would be in large cities outside of Jerusalem. Then they had something called the bench. It was the bench of three, and the bench of three was what you had in every synagogue, okay? So you've got kind of a hierarchy there. You've got the Great Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, then you had these little Sanhedrins, in the major cities, and then every synagogue had the bench of three, and then you had something called the bench not authorized. That's what it's called. And the bench not authorized was basically just a group of normal, everyday, run-of-the-mill people within the synagogue. So this is the way they did it in Judaism. And I think, this is my opinion, I can't prove this, but I think Paul had something similar in mind when he said the least esteemed in the church. In other words, you don't come running to the pastor saying, oh, pastor, can you please tell Isaac to give me my money back? So it's something that the people of the church have to decide. You don't go to the big guys who wields the hammer of authority and says, you must give the money back. What do you do? What do you do? So let's say that two people have a problem and they come to the pastor and the pastor has to decide, and he's going to decide on his own, and he's going to wield the hammer of authority, and you're supposed to submit to that because you brought it to the church. And so to keep that kind of thing from happening, when we judge with the least esteemed in the church, that doesn't mean that somebody else is esteemed less. That just means that they are lower on the rungs of authority. All right. So in other words, it's brought before the church, and the normal, everyday, run-of-the-mill people of the church have to figure out what needs to be done in that matter. So how? Yeah. Right. So, the jury of your peers, I guess you'd say. Right, right. But you can't really do that in a situation like this, because what's happened? Let's say it's not me. Let's say it's Lane and Isaac. Okay, Isaac sold Lane a bad vehicle, and they've gone through the steps. He talked to him. The witnesses talked to him. Now it's going to be taken to the church. Okay, so Lane says, "Listen, Pastor, we need to have an impromptu church meeting so that we can discuss a problem that Isaac and I have, so that we can get the church's mind on this and we can come to an agreement." So we do, and everything is submitted, all of the evidence and discussion is done, and at the end of it all, we all vote, and I am not the authority to decide in that matter anymore. It is now the whole church deciding. So it's not, I like Lane's tie, so Isaac, give him his money back. Check. You like that? Checks out. That's good. The Trump tie works every time. Anyway, so the church decides, and it's not those in high authority, but it is the least esteemed, okay, that makes the decision. Now, that's just my opinion. That's what I think, and I think that because of what the very next verse says. Yes? Yeah, it's not just people that come. Look, there's a difference between church attendees and church members, right? Church members decide church business. Church attendees can watch, they can listen. As far as I'm concerned, they may even have a say, but we don't really, their vote doesn't count, all right? Yes? Which verse are we talking about? Verse 4, okay. Yeah. He is making a comparison, but this is going to go into Greek criticism kind of stuff. There's no punctuation in the original manuscripts. They didn't use punctuation in the Greek in the original manuscripts, okay? So how do we know whether or not it should be a question or a period? We know that based upon the Greek grammatical structure, all right? So not to pick on the NIV, but they took great liberties with expressing dynamic equivalency over formal equivalency in the NIV, which means they're translating it and also telling you what they think it should mean, rather than letting you study it out for yourself. Okay? So whether it's a question or a period can be discerned by the construction of Greek. That's like a Korean sentence, okay? Mr. Kim, I'm going to give you a Korean sentence, and you tell me if it's a question or if it's a statement, okay? All right? Now I got to think of something that I want to say. What? Coffee. I need to ask about coffee. Ice cream? Ice cream mashiseo. So I made a statement, right? Ice cream mashiseo. It's the same words, but is it a statement or a question now? Ice cream mashiseo. Now it's a question because I kind of went up, right? Same words, but you know from what I say. But if you have written language, then you don't do that. You wouldn't say mashiseo. What would you say? And if it was a question, what would you say? But let's not use that level. Let's make it more formal. Make it more formal. You're not helping me at all. Okay, sumnida and sumnika. Sumnida is, sumnika is, and we know that. You don't have to put a period. You don't have to put a question mark. You know that because it's written into the Korean language, right? In Greek, they have the same sort of apparatuses in the language. So you know if it should be a period or a question. Now, what's even more helpful is that in the 7th to the 9th century, we went from what's called uncial to minuscule in Greek. Uncial means everything is written in capital letters and there's no spaces. If you didn't know Greek, you would be in trouble because you wouldn't know if, the guy said, I saw abundance, or if he said, I saw abundance. Okay? Yeah, there's a difference there because there's no spaces and no punctuation. It could be quite confusing. So in the 7th to the 9th century, we went from all capital letters, no spaces, no punctuation. When they started copying the manuscripts over, then they started using lowercase Greek and capital letters for, places and so forth. And they started putting in the punctuation. What does that mean? The punctuation is not necessarily inspired. But then again, it kind of is because we know what's supposed to be there. We just finally figured out how to make a symbol for it. Does everybody follow me? So I would have to look at the Greek, at the manuscript, to see if there was a period there or a question mark there. But I'd be willing to bet you that there's a period. How much you want to lose? No, come on, this is a quick cup of coffee for me. So anyway, so that answers the question about whether or not it should be a question or a period. But the point is very well made. If it's a statement, he says, set them who are least esteemed in the church. Yes. Those are despised.
Yeah, so I kind of, I see it as the same. If then you have judges, that's good for our
Could be sarcasm, but look at the next verse. Right. Right. So the question is, who are those that are least esteemed in the church? Paul doesn't mean that we are to pick those who are not spiritually minded, because the context is everything. So look at the next verse. Let's read the next verse. I speak to your shame. Is it so that there is not a wise man among you? No, not one that shall be able to judge between his brethren. So the least esteemed in the church are not those that are despised spiritually, if you understand what I'm saying. They're not the guys who can't even handle their own affairs, and how in the world would you want them to handle a church affair? That's not the idea there. The idea there is you're choosing someone that is common. Not that anyone is common, but I'm trying to find the right word for that. I don't know if I can find it. But just the average church guy. Not the guy with the authority to say, no, you got to do this. Suddenly, it's the average church person, and the church decides, and that's the point. The church decides what to do, and not just one guy. And that's an important point in church discipline. Because I got to tell you, I can't tell you how many times people have brought things to me and they expect the pastor to fix it. Right? And I'm going, why? Did you follow the rules before you came to me? Have you tried to... Who said the lowest level? That was it. Where'd you get that? Where'd you learn that? From what? From the Air Force. The Air Force says this all the time. Fix your problems at the lowest possible level. Don't you dare jump the chain of command, right? You know what can happen to you if you jump the chain of command? You shouldn't have to get in trouble. You shouldn't get in trouble, but you will. Yeah, it does depend on your leadership. And that's a good thing, but very few people are blessed with that, at least not for long periods of time. So enjoy it while you have it. Amen. So, he says in verse 5, I speak this to your shame. Why? Because they were taking people to court. All right? Is it so that there is not... Can't you find not one person in your church? Isn't there anybody? Yes.
They were also taking Paul.
Okay.
They were asking someone outside their church, can you help us out in this situation?
Jerusalem apparently pre-existed, and they still they had questions. So because there should be people in your church that can answer these questions. Obviously, they're not doing their job correctly. You've got bigger issues, but they should be able to handle it.
Right. No. Not one that shall be able to judge between his brethren. I said no, and everybody was like, no, what do you mean? Is he wrong? No, I'm just reading the verse. So Paul's rebuke is driven even deeper by asking them whether or not there were any wise that could make the decision. And again, the type of matters that Paul is dealing here with are civil matters. Now, I kind of want to take a side note here because we have issues with this a lot. And I think we need to be, as a church, we need to understand these rules and we need to be very careful with this, okay? There are some things that the courts really just don't care about, but we would. Those matters, the church is sufficient. But in some cases, the federal courts or the whatever needs to know. They need to be informed in that. There was a case in Indiana where the pastor took a 16-year-old girl across state lines, and he wasn't giving her a ride to grandma's house, okay? And they busted him, and they needed to bust him. It got found out in the church. The church did what the church was supposed to do all along the way. They handled it within the church, and they notified the authorities. He lost his position, obviously, lost his membership as well, and the federal authorities threw him in jail. And that's the way that needed to be handled because he was a felon, all right? He broke a federal law as well as, breaking a moral law, okay? And we've got moral laws in the Bible, things that we Christians believe we should be doing, the court doesn't care anything about. I could give you an example. Let's say that Lane, walks up to me and calls me a dirty, rotten, low-down, good-for-nothing bum. Now, according to the Christian law, he should not approach another Christian in that way. But you try to take that to the court. Judge, he called me a dirty, rotten, low-down, good-for-nothing bum. They're going to throw your case out because they don't care. All right? So we need to keep everything in perspective. If it breaks a federal law or, a local law or something of that nature, you are going to get your church in trouble if you don't report it. And that has happened too. There was a case in Florida. Yeah, where the church did not report it. Instead, they put him through counseling and tried to help him get over his issues. And then to kind of quiet things down, they shipped him off to Europe and made him a missionary over there somewhere where he, just did the same things again. And, retired and came back, and 33 ladies in Florida put him up on charges, and they put him in jail, and before it could go to court, he ended up dying. Yeah. That whole issue could have been solved and maybe even saved the guy's life if it would have been reported correctly the first time. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? So we've got to make sure that we handle things at the appropriate level. So, now, another side note, none of this would even be possible if the church were not defined as a local church. In other words, you cannot have the church decide in a matter if you're not, in the same local church. So if you're dealing with somebody outside the local church, I agree with Sandy. The best thing to do is just to forgive them if you can. But sometimes it's just not that simple. Like Chris, he can forgive them all he wants, but he's still going to go deep into debt. And the ramifications from that are going to be far-reaching if he doesn't get the law involved. Okay? So it's not as easy sometimes as that. And you really need to pray about it and think about, what steps you're willing to make according to your conscience. Let's stop here. We'll come back to verse 6 next week. And any questions on what we covered? No questions? Good. In that case, let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll be dismissed and figure out what in the world we're doing from there, right? Good idea? Brother Cam, why don't you close us in prayer? Amen. All right, we'll be dismissed. Now